Hi, welcome. On this video, I want to take a few minutes to talk about the issue of rehabilitating the aggressive dog within the parameters of the process. Now here, this is where, again, I talk about this, what the process is. I talk about it being a relational changing one. That's what's really happening, and that it's critical to identify it as such so that you can actually control the outcome. However, okay, within the parameters of mainstream dog training, again, on a couple other videos, I define the terminology that is used to describe certain groups of trainers, both balanced, so-called balanced dog trainers, and pure positive trainers. And I associate to this what, as I define, a relational spectrum. Okay, so it's like a point from which from which what training is, to right through as you kind of follow that down, right to the opposite end of it. What happens in relation to these issues as it relates to control and the motives of dogs, how that plays out in this picture problem that I talk a lot about in the dog training world. How does that appearances can be very, very deceiving within the framework of this learning-based narrative, as dogs more often than not can simply go through the motions while they continue to hold on to control in the relationship. Things will look great. You'll get your certificate saying that you passed whatever course or whatever you were doing, but then you're wondering, why is this disconnected? I'm still dealing with these certain issues. Well, it's because relational change hasn't actually happened. It just appeared that something good was happening at the response level. And so again, it's really critical to understand the process itself. But again, so when you add another factor in the equation here, when you're dealing with certain types of aggression, so aggression itself, just understand aggression is an issue about control and motives. Again, that expressed state of mind is directly corresponds to that, to this issue about the relationship, about the motives of the dog beginning to go sideways, kind of like stinking thinking. Okay, dog's going to start to express those states, and then factoring in, okay, when you put that into this equation, in terms of the various approaches of training within this learning-based narrative, what is the, what's the expectations, of success. This is the problem here, okay? So when you take that, this is why when you look at this issue about pure positive training, or those who approach training as a full-blown learning-based exercise, and oftentimes to identify it, you'll see this kind of anti-dominance, anti-force, narrative that is kind of intertwined in that. Okay, you'll see that. That's how you can kind of identify that. Say, well, I'm in a pure positive, approach system. But in relation to actually fixing an aggressive dog, and again, understand that I talk about how the focus shifts away from the person onto the dog within this learning narrative, you're going to have tremendous problems. Just understand, because here's the thing about the so-called pure positive approach. It isn't about testing or exposing the motives of the dog that way. Okay, so they, within that approach, they promote certain interactions that allow the dog to maintain control. So how they use leashes, how they use rewards, and this issue about, I even talk about control actually being an incentive for the dog. It's extremely problematic. So it's a appearance-based narrative in a big way. So really, ultimately, you never get the problem fixed. Okay, and then this is where, again, you see this kind of people wonder why it is that certain groups of trainers will blame the dog for bad blood and getting it and send your dog to a vet, but in the end there's nothing ever resolved other than the fact they can't resolve it. That's why, because of the fact of you've got a process problem in relation to how change is defined. Now taking it so there's that extreme. Okay, just understand, if you're taking it, if you're trying to change dog aggression within a full-blown learning-based narrative, you got major problems. Expect them. But then taking it to within the balanced training approach, again, understand this is where this is kind of like a hybrid type of thing. This is why you'll see these balanced trainers. It's difficult to even define, where that line is. because you'll see extremes there. You'll see right from using treats to remote callers and everything in between. You'll see, and then this learning-based narrative being used at a certain level too. And so you'll see that kind of how that kind of graphs up and down on that spectrum. Again, just understand if you can still, you have to almost like look at the individual approach itself to get a kind of a definition as to what level really you're putting, you're risking, the risk levels going up in terms of whether or not you're actually going to be able to influence how the dog thinks in relation to how the decision-making process is governed. So, but when you look at within the parameters of balanced training, this is where it gets, again, the same problems develop. And because here's the problem. The issue is when you approach training other than what it is and you don't identify it for what it is, then these control issues can play out. There's gaps, okay? Dogs can push through even the remote collar. And I talk about issues about device awareness where you're getting these issues where you can never get the remote collar off the dog for fear that, because you already know that you don't have that type of influence without that device being attached. And so what happens is, because change doesn't really happen, you're still into a control management situation. You're not truly into a change situation where you can strip everything away. Everything isn't a means to an end. You're attached to certain things, and then you always have this problem in terms of even how long it takes for if change is happening. It could be on it could take a very long period of time. So there's all these different factors to really consider when you're dealing with an aggressive case. Just understand if you're taking and applying that within the parameters of mainstream dog training within this learning-based narrative at some level, you're going to have problems, especially for very aggressive dogs. And then the issue about appearances, again, that's the other issue about control. Things can appear a certain way, and this is where you can even get this issue about dogs, how they interact amongst other dogs. Things can look like play or look like it's going great. That dog is continuing to hold and control and gain through that. So how it manifests and how it plays out, again, our expectations of what the information that we want or expect is different, because nature does not reveal itself that way at that level. It's different. You have to be able to understand or know how to expose it through the type of interactions and methodology that, again, frames it up. So again, the method itself is very, very important beyond just the idea of leadership, because again, there's lots of people out there that promote leadership, but then getting into the actual specifics of the methodology and how it speaks the right language to create change, that's equally, if not more important than just an idea of something. So anyway, thanks for watching.